I trusted my brother with nearly $1 million in stocks. At the time, I genuinely believed that family meant loyalty, that blood ties meant automatic trust. We had grown up together in the same small house, shared secrets whispered late at night, laughed over small victories like passing exams and landing first jobs, and dreamed about bigger ones like early retirement and financial freedom. So when I mentioned an investment opportunity that could potentially double our money, I expected excitement, maybe some healthy skepticism, but never the cold smirk that spread across his face. "You're clueless about investing, James," he said, leaning back in his expensive leather chair like he already owned the world. The way he said my name dripped with condescension. I laughed nervously, brushing off the insult, not realizing how deadly serious he was. Not understanding that this moment was the beginning of the worst betrayal I would ever experience. My brother Kyle had always been competitive, always needed to be the smartest person in the room, but I had never imagined he would actually steal from me. At first, it started with small things that seemed innocent enough. He would ask me to approve trades, suggesting we move stocks around for better returns. He would have me check numbers on spreadsheets he had prepared, pointing out opportunities he claimed to have researched extensively. He would slide forms across the table at family dinners, asking me to sign authorization papers for joint transactions. I thought he was being helpful, that he was learning about finance and wanted to manage our combined investments carefully. I was so incredibly wrong. Until one Tuesday morning, I logged into my investment account from my office computer and felt my entire world freeze. The balance on the screen didn't make sense. I refreshed the page, thinking it was a technical error. But the number remained the same. Nearly $1 million gone. Vanished. All of it. And the only trace was a series of unauthorized transfers, each one bearing a digital signature that looked suspiciously like my authorization, but that I absolutely had not approved. My stomach turned to ice. My hands started shaking so badly, I could barely hold my phone. I called Kyle immediately, not even caring that I was in the middle of my workday and my colleagues could hear me. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice cracking with panic and rising anger. "Where is my money? Where did it all go?" There was a pause on the other end, and then he chuckled. That same infuriating smirk was audible even through the phone. "Relax, man. You're seriously overreacting right now. Stocks are volatile, you know that. The market dipped. You'll see it bounce back in a few weeks. Trust me." But I didn't trust him. Not anymore. I felt something fundamental break inside me in that moment. It wasn't just money disappearing from an account. It was trust shattering like glass. It was the realization that family didn't mean what I thought it meant. And for the first time in my life, I saw Kyle for who he really was, not my brother, not my partner, but a thief who had been planning this for months. The man who had grown up sharing a bedroom with me had stolen nearly everything I had worked years to accumulate. I spent sleepless nights replaying everything that had happened over the past 6 months. Obsessively tracing every transaction in my account history, printing out statements, highlighting transfers I didn't remember authorizing. Every lie Kyle had told me, every excuse about market fluctuations, every fake smile he had given me at family gatherings. It all flashed before my eyes in painful clarity. I realized with crushing certainty that I couldn't rely on anyone but myself anymore. Trust was a luxury I could no longer afford. That was when the plan began to form in my mind. I started small and moved quietly, like a predator stalking prey. I didn't confront Kyle immediately, as much as I wanted to scream at him, to punch him, to drag him to the police. I needed leverage first. I needed to understand exactly what he had done with my money and how to get it back. I began learning his routines, watching his social media posts, tracking his investments through public records, even noting the people he bragged about knowing in private conversations. I pretended life was going on as usual while inside. I was calculating every single move like a chess master. Weeks turned into months of careful observation and planning. Kyle flaunted his new purchases without shame. A brand new luxury car, expensive watches, the latest tech gadgets, designer clothes he posted about constantly. All of it bought with money that was supposed to be ours. Money he had stolen from me through forged signatures and manipulated forms. "Still clueless about money, huh?" he said again one Sunday at our parents' house, laughing when I casually asked him about a small discrepancy I had noticed in our old portfolio records. That laugh fueled the fire burning inside me. It made me more determined than ever. I realized the key to destroying Kyle was his pride. Everything about him was inflated with arrogance. His car, his clothes, his constant bragging about investment returns he claimed to be getting. Pride, I learned through careful observation, has a fatal weakness. It makes people predictable. It makes them blind to threats they consider beneath them. And Kyle definitely considered me beneath him. He thought I was too stupid, too trusting, too clueless to ever figure out what he had done or to fight back effectively. I started buying small stakes in properties he had been eyeing for months, purchasing them anonymously through shell companies and legal trusts. I hired a sharp lawyer who taught me how to make offers below market value on distressed properties, how to negotiate with desperate sellers, how to close deals quickly and quietly. At first, Kyle didn't notice what I was doing. He thought he was still ahead of me, still untouchable, still the smarter brother who had pulled off the perfect crime. But behind the scenes, I was quietly acquiring assets he cared deeply about. The tension built silently like a gathering storm. Every call I made to real estate agents, every contract I signed in small office buildings across the city, every property inspection I attended, I imagined Kyle's face when he eventually discovered what I was doing. The idea of poetic justice became intoxicating, almost addictive. I would lie awake at night imagining the moment I would reveal everything to him, planning exactly what I would say, how I would watch his arrogant smirk finally disappear from his face forever. Then came the moment I had been planning for months. Kyle had been obsessing over a particular house for nearly a year, a beautiful 3-bedroom property in an upscale neighborhood he couldn't quite afford on his stolen money alone. He talked about it constantly at family dinners, imagining it as the ultimate symbol of his success, proof that he was smarter and more accomplished than everyone else. I made an offer on that house, a careful and legally airtight offer that was significantly below the asking price. The seller was desperate and accepted within 48 hours. Kyle never saw it coming, not even a hint. When I finally told him what I had done, calling him from the driveway of his dream house that was now mine, he laughed. Not because he was genuinely amused, but because he thought I was joking. Yeah, right. You couldn't possibly afford that place. Nice try, man. His voice was filled with that familiar condescension. I let the silence stretch for a moment, savoring what came next. I did buy it, Kyle. I closed on it yesterday. And I've been thinking about rental properties. So congratulations, you can be my first tenant. You're paying rent starting next month. I heard the exact moment the reality hit him. The sharp intake of breath, the pause as his brain processed what I was saying, then the sputter of disbelief. You're not serious. There's no way you. I cut him off coldly. I am completely serious. Check the property records if you don't believe me. The deed has my name on it. And unless you want to find somewhere else to live, you'll be paying me $1,500 a month. First and last month's rent due by the end of the week. I saw the shock register on his face when we met in person the next day to discuss the rental agreement. A flicker of genuine panic crossed his features, quickly replaced by denial, then anger, then grudging acceptance. The tables had turned so quickly and so completely it was almost cruel. And for the first time since discovering my empty bank account, I felt the rush of vindication coursing through my veins like electricity. This was justice. This was balance being restored. This was the beginning of Kyle understanding what betrayal actually cost. But I didn't stop there. The house was just the opening move in a longer game. I had learned my lesson the hard way. Never trust someone blindly, even family. Especially family, apparently. I tightened control over all my finances, hired a forensic accountant to audit every investment I owned, and protected myself legally with trusts and liability shields. Every loophole I had once ignored because I trusted Kyle, every risk I had once let him manage because he claimed to know better, I now controlled personally and completely. Our interactions changed dramatically and immediately. Every time Kyle came to the house that should have been his dream home but was now my rental property, it was purely professional. Cold. Transactional. He paid rent on time because he had no choice. He cleaned up after himself because I made it clear in the lease that I would inspect regularly. He realized slowly and painfully that the entire power dynamic between us had shifted permanently. No more smirks. No more casual betrayals. No more condescending comments about my intelligence or financial knowledge. Every conversation we had now carried a heavy weight, a subtle but unmistakable acknowledgement that I was no longer the naive younger brother he could manipulate. I had evolved into something he hadn't anticipated, someone who learned from mistakes, who adapted, who struck back with precision rather than emotion. The change in me was visible to everyone who knew us. I was sharper now, more focused, less reactive to provocations. I laughed less frequently, but when I did laugh, it carried weight and confidence, the kind that comes when you know you've regained complete control of your life. There were moments of doubt, I'll admit. Late nights when I wondered if I had gone too far, if revenge was consuming me in unhealthy ways, if destroying Kyle's pride was worth the emotional energy I was investing. But then I would remember logging into that account and seeing nearly $1 million gone. I would remember his laugh when I asked about it. I would remember years of hard work and careful saving, all stolen in a matter of weeks. And the doubt would vanish, replaced by cold certainty that justice was being served. Friends and co-workers noticed the transformation in me. Some commented on it directly, saying I seemed different, harder somehow. I had become less willing to do favors without expecting something in return. I questioned motives more carefully. I protected my interests more aggressively. I laughed less at things that weren't genuinely funny. But my laughter, when it came, carried real weight now. The kind that comes from knowing you've regained control from someone who tried to destroy you. Kyle tried subtle manipulation at first, the same tactics that had worked on me before. He would ask for small favors, casual requests that seemed innocent. He would offer to help with projects around my house, suggesting we could work together like old times. He even attempted emotional guilt, bringing up childhood memories and family loyalty. But I recognized each manipulation attempt immediately because I had studied him so carefully. I had anticipated every move he might make, and I refused every single request without hesitation or explanation. I held the line firmly. Then one day, about 8 months after he had moved into my rental property, Kyle said something that almost sounded human. We were standing in the driveway, and I was collecting the rent check. I never fully realized how badly I messed up, he said quietly, his voice lacking its usual arrogant confidence, but still not quite carrying genuine conviction. There was maybe a trace of actual regret buried somewhere in those words. Maybe. I looked at him for a long moment, studying his face for signs of sincerity. I didn't respond with words. Words felt unnecessary and potentially dangerous. They could give him an opening to manipulate me again. My actions had spoken louder than any apology he could offer ever would. The fact that he was paying me rent in the house he had dreamed of owning said everything that needed to be said about consequences and justice. I simply took the check, nodded once, and walked back into my house, leaving him standing there with whatever thoughts were going through his head. Time passed with surprising quickness. The money Kyle had stolen never returned to my account. He had spent most of it on depreciating assets and bad investments, squandering it exactly as he had accused me of being likely to do. But strangely, the actual money didn't matter as much anymore. What mattered was the lesson that had been delivered and received. The stock loss became just a footnote in my life story, rather than the defining tragedy I had initially thought it would be. What truly mattered now was control, power, and the crystal clarity that comes when you refuse to be a victim. I built my own investment portfolio from scratch, starting over with what little savings I had left and the rental income from Kyle's monthly payments. I diversified carefully across different asset classes, never putting too much in any single investment. I watched Kyle struggle to keep up with his expensive lifestyle while paying rent he could barely afford. Every missed opportunity he lamented on social media, every deal he complained about losing, I quietly celebrated internally. Not with obvious gloating, but with the deep satisfaction that comes from seeing balance restored to an unjust universe. Occasionally, Kyle would try to reassert his dominance in subtle ways. He would make comments about his past investment successes, conveniently forgetting they were funded by money he stole from me. He would take subtle digs at my more conservative investment approach, calling it overly cautious or lacking vision. But I had grown completely immune to his manipulations. The man who once called me clueless, with such conviction, was now the one who had to answer to me, obey my rules as his landlord, and respect boundaries I established without negotiation. The final twist in our complicated story came about a year after he moved into my rental property. Kyle approached me nervously one evening, shifting his weight from foot to foot in a way that betrayed his discomfort. "Hey, I need to ask you something," he started, his voice carefully casual. "I'm a bit short this month because of some unexpected expenses. Could you possibly give me a short-term loan? Just like $2,000, I promise I'll pay you back with interest next month." He phrased it carefully, trying to sound responsible and trustworthy. I looked at him, really looked at his face, and realized with startling clarity how completely the roles had reversed. The brother who had stolen nearly $1 million from me was now begging me for a $2,000 loan. The man who had called me clueless about money was now financially desperate enough to ask me for help. I felt a mix of emotions, satisfaction, pity, vindication, and something close to sadness for what our relationship had become. "Sorry, Kyle," I said evenly, my voice betraying no emotion. "I don't do short-term loans. Not to anyone. Rent is still due on the 1st of the month." I watched him leave my property that evening, his pride visibly battered, but still somehow intact enough to keep him walking upright. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt relief rather than burning anger. Justice had been served, silently, efficiently, completely, and with no unnecessary public spectacle or dramatic confrontation. He had learned his lesson. I had reclaimed my power. The universe had rebalanced itself through my careful planning and patient execution. That was enough. Looking back on everything now, I understand that betrayal is extraordinarily painful in the moment, but it's also deeply instructive if you're willing to learn from it. I learned who my true allies actually were, surprisingly few people, as it turned out. I learned which friends would stand by me, and which would awkwardly avoid the topic of family drama. Most importantly, I learned who I could truly rely on without question myself. That lesson, that fundamental understanding of self-reliance, was worth far more than nearly $1 million could ever be. The confidence that came from handling the situation myself, from not needing anyone to rescue me or fix my problems, transformed how I approached every aspect of my life. At work, I started taking on bigger challenges because I knew I could handle failure and betrayal and still come out stronger. In relationships, I set clearer boundaries and walked away faster when people showed signs of untrustworthiness. I stopped giving people the benefit of the doubt when their actions contradicted their words. I became, in essence, someone who trusted carefully and conditionally rather than blindly and completely. Now, when I walk past the house I purchased, Kyle's dream house that became my investment property, and his humiliation, I remember the entire journey. The shock of discovering the theft, the disbelief that my own brother could do something so cruel, the months of careful planning in secret, the moment of striking back, and the eventual triumph of poetic justice. Every step of that journey shaped me into someone stronger, someone harder to fool, someone who understood that family could betray you just as easily as strangers could, maybe even more easily because you trusted them more deeply. The monthly rent checks arrive on time now without fail. Kyle learned that lesson at least. I don't accept late payments, and he knows I would evict him without hesitation if he tested me. The arrogant smile that once mocked me for being clueless has vanished completely from his face, replaced by a tight-lipped expression that betrays his resentment but also his grudging acceptance. And in its place, there's a different kind of understanding between us, a quiet acknowledgement of the new reality, and the unspoken truth that hangs in the air whenever we interact. Betrayal has a price, and justice can be incredibly sweet when it's calculated carefully and executed patiently. I'm not vindictive by nature. I'm not cruel or sadistic. I don't take pleasure in Kyle's reduced circumstances just for the sake of watching him suffer. But I am aware now in ways I never was before, and that awareness changed absolutely everything about how I live my life. I regained control not just over my finances, but over my entire existence. I reclaimed my sense of self-worth that Kyle had tried to destroy. And I discovered through painful experience that sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't found in dramatic confrontation or public humiliation, but in silent, unstoppable, methodical action. Our family gatherings are awkward now. Our parents sense the tension between us, but don't fully understand what happened. I never told them the complete story because I didn't want to destroy their relationship with Kyle. At Thanksgiving and Christmas, we sit at opposite ends of the table. We make polite small talk, but never discuss anything substantive. Our mother sometimes comments sadly that she wishes we were close like we used to be when we were children. I just smile and change the subject, knowing that childhood closeness was based on innocence and trust that can never be rebuilt once it's been shattered so completely. Kyle eventually stopped trying to manipulate me or win back my trust. He realized, perhaps faster than I expected, that the damage was permanent and irreparable. We would never be close brothers again. We would never share confidences or celebrate successes together. Our relationship had been reduced to landlord and tenant, creditor and debtor, victor and defeated. And while that reality made me sad on some level, mourning the brother I thought I had, it also felt right and necessary. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive, even if you can move past them. I started dating someone new about 2 years after the theft. A woman named Sophie who worked in corporate law and understood contracts and boundaries in ways that made me feel safe. When I told her the story of Kyle and the stolen money and the rental property revenge, she listened carefully without judgment. "You did what you had to do," she said simply. "And you were smarter about it than most people would have been. Most people would have just reported him to the police and gotten nothing back." She was right. My approach had been cold and calculating, but it had also been effective in ways that legal prosecution might not have been. Sophie helped me see that I wasn't wrong to protect myself so aggressively. She validated feelings I had been uncertain about, confirming that setting hard boundaries with family wasn't cruel. It was self-preservation. Her perspective as an outsider who understood legal ramifications gave me confidence that my actions had been justified, proportional, and ultimately fair. Kyle had stolen from me, so I had taken something he wanted. He had betrayed my trust, so I had removed all trust permanently. The scales were balanced, even if the relationship was destroyed. I eventually told our parents a simplified version of what happened, that Kyle had made unauthorized transactions with my money, and that we had a falling out over it. I didn't mention the specific amount or the detailed revenge plan because I didn't want them to take sides or feel they had to choose between their sons. My father, who had worked hard his whole life and valued honesty above everything, looked deeply disappointed when I told him. "I raised you boys better than that," he said quietly, though I wasn't sure if he was talking to me, to Kyle, or to both of us. My mother cried when she learned we were no longer close. She had always dreamed of her sons being best friends for life, supporting each other through everything, maybe even working together someday. That dream was dead now, killed by Kyle's greed and my need for revenge. "Can't you two work it out?" she pleaded during one particularly difficult family dinner. "Life is too short to hold grudges against family." I looked at Kyle across the table, saw the resentment still burning in his eyes, and shook my head. "Some things can't be worked out, Mom. Some things just are what they are." The truth was that I had worked it out, on my own terms, through my own methods, achieving my own version of justice. Kyle was living with the consequences of his choices every single day. He paid me rent in a house he had once dreamed of owning. He saw me at family gatherings as someone he had to be careful around rather than someone he could manipulate. He experienced, monthly, the reality that actions have consequences and betrayal has prices. That was working it out. It just didn't look like the happy reconciliation my mother wanted to see. Over time, I expanded my real estate holdings beyond just the one property Kyle rented. I bought a second rental house, then a third, building a portfolio that generated steady passive income. Each property represented security and independence, proof that I could build wealth through my own intelligence and effort without needing to trust anyone else with my financial future. Real estate became my focus, something tangible and controllable, unlike stocks that could disappear with a few unauthorized transfers. Kyle watched my growing success with obvious bitterness. He would make comments at family gatherings about how lucky I was, how real estate was easier than what he was doing, how I had gotten in at the right time. He couldn't bring himself to acknowledge that my success came from hard work, careful research, and the lessons I had learned from his betrayal. He needed to believe I was lucky rather than admit I was competent. His ego couldn't handle the truth that the clueless brother he had stolen from was now significantly more successful than he was. I hired a property management company to handle the day-to-day operations of my rentals, including collecting rent from Kyle. It created a professional buffer between us, and meant I didn't have to interact with him monthly. The checks came through an automated system. Maintenance requests went through proper channels. Our personal contact was minimized to family obligations and nothing more. This arrangement worked better for both of us. He didn't have to face me and feel humiliated, and I didn't have to look at him and remember the betrayal constantly. The property management company called me one day with an interesting report. "Your tenant in the Westbrook property is late with rent this month," the manager said, referring to Kyle's address. "He claims he sent the check, but we haven't received it. This is the second time. What would you like us to do?" I thought about it carefully. Kyle was testing boundaries, seeing if I would relax the rules, if time and family connection would make me soft again. "Standard policy," I said firmly. 5-day notice to pay or vacate. No exceptions. When Kyle called me directly, bypassing the property management company, his voice was angry and desperate. Seriously? You're going to evict your own brother over being a few days late. I kept my voice calm and professional. I'm not evicting you for being late. The property management company is following standard lease terms that you agreed to. If you pay within 5 days plus the late fee, there's no problem. If you don't, yes, the eviction process will begin. Same as any other tenant. He hung up on me, but the rent arrived within 3 days. He had learned another lesson. I meant what I said, every time, without exception. These small tests happened occasionally. Kyle would push against boundaries, probe for weakness, see if the old dynamics could be restored. But I held firm every single time. Late rent resulted in late fees. Maintenance issues he caused came with bills he had to pay. Lease violations resulted in warnings and documentation. I treated him exactly as I would treat any tenant. No better, no worse. Family connection earned him no special treatment. If anything, I was stricter with him because I knew his manipulative tendencies and refused to enable them. Sophie and I got engaged 3 years after the theft incident. I proposed on a beach at sunset, traditional and romantic, and she said yes immediately with tears in her eyes. When we started planning the wedding, the question of Kyle inevitably came up. Do you want to invite your brother? Sophie asked gently. I'll support whatever you decide. I thought about it for days. Part of me wanted to exclude him completely, to have a wedding free from the tension and resentment that now defined our relationship. But another part of me knew our parents would be heartbroken if their sons couldn't be together even for such an important day. I decided to invite him, but with conditions. He would be a regular guest, not in the wedding party. He would sit with our parents at the ceremony, not at the head table at the reception. He would receive the same invitation as distant cousins and old family friends. Welcome to attend, but not given any special role or honor. When the invitation arrived at his rental house, my rental house, I wondered what he thought about it. Did he feel hurt at being excluded from the wedding party? Did he understand why? Did he care at all? Kyle attended the wedding, looking uncomfortable in a suit that was slightly too tight. He congratulated us briefly in a receiving line, his smile forced and not reaching his eyes. Congratulations, man. Sophie's great. You're lucky. That word again, lucky. As if my happiness was random chance rather than the result of choices and values and treating people with respect. I thanked him politely and moved on to the next guest. Sophie squeezed my hand, knowing exactly what I was thinking and feeling even without words. During the reception, I watched Kyle drinking alone at a table near the back, not socializing with other guests, just nursing his whiskey and staring at nothing in particular. Our mother approached him several times, trying to draw him into conversations or get him to dance, but he just shook his head. He looked miserable in a way that should have made me feel satisfied, but instead just made me feel tired. How had we gotten here? How had 2 brothers who once shared everything ended up as barely tolerant strangers at a wedding? But then I thought about that day I discovered the missing $1 million. I remembered the panic and betrayal and crushing realization that family meant nothing to Kyle when money was involved. I remembered months of careful planning to regain some measure of justice. I remembered every rent check representing consequences he earned through his own choices. And I realized I didn't regret any of it. The sadness I felt wasn't about my choices. It was about his. He had destroyed our relationship. I had just responded appropriately to that destruction. Sophie and I honeymooned in Italy for 2 weeks, touring ancient ruins and eating incredible food, and not thinking about Kyle or family drama or rental properties. It was blissful and freeing, this time away from everything complicated and painful. When we returned home and I checked my email, there was a message from the property management company. Tenant at Westbrook Property has given 60-day notice to vacate. Moving out next month. Kyle was leaving the rental house, leaving the daily reminder of his failure and my victory. I felt oddly ambivalent about Kyle moving out. Part of me was relieved. It would remove the constant connection between us, the monthly rent ritual that kept the wound fresh. But another part of me felt like I was losing something, like the justice I had achieved was somehow incomplete if he wasn't living with the consequences every single day. Sophie noticed my conflicted mood. It's okay to have mixed feelings, she said wisely. What he did was terrible. What you did in response was fair. But that doesn't mean any of it feels good. Justice and satisfaction aren't always the same thing. The property management company found a new tenant quickly, a young couple expecting their first child, thrilled to rent a nice house in a good neighborhood. When they moved in, I realized I felt happy for them in a way I never had with Kyle. They appreciated the house, took care of it properly, paid rent early, sent thank you notes when I approved upgrades. They turned it back into just a rental property rather than a battleground. The house stopped being about revenge and became about investment and income, which was honestly healthier for everyone involved. Kyle moved into a small apartment across town. I heard about it through our parents, who worried that he was downsizing too much, living in a place that wasn't nice enough for their successful son. They didn't understand that Kyle was living in exactly the place he could afford after squandering nearly $1 million on depreciating assets and bad decisions. They saw it as temporary hardship. I saw it as permanent consequences. The distance between those perspectives created tension at family gatherings that everyone could feel but nobody discussed directly. Years passed. Sophie and I had 2 children, a daughter named Emma and a son named James. Junior parenthood changed my perspective on everything, including my relationship with Kyle. Watching my children play together, seeing their innocent trust in each other, I mourned what Kyle and I had lost. I wanted my kids to stay close their whole lives. I wanted them to never experience the betrayal that had destroyed what Kyle and I once had. But I also knew I couldn't control that. I could only teach them about integrity, consequences, and self-respect. Kyle eventually got married too, to a woman named Beth who seemed nice enough from the distance I maintained. I was invited to their wedding and attended briefly, returning the courtesy he had shown at mine. His wedding was smaller than ours, less expensive, held in a modest venue that made our parents comment quietly about how different it was from my celebration. Kyle had wanted a big elaborate wedding in the house he used to rent from me. I learned later from our mother. But he couldn't afford it. Consequences were still playing out, even years later. Our children met at family gatherings and played together without understanding the complicated history between their fathers. Emma and Kyle's daughter Zoe became friendly, trading toys and sharing snacks at birthday parties. Watching them, I felt grateful that the next generation didn't have to carry the weight of our broken relationship. Whatever else happened, Kyle and I both protected our children from the worst of our conflict. We were civil at family events. We didn't fight in front of them. We maintained a surface-level courtesy that allowed normal family functions to proceed. One afternoon, about 7 years after the original theft, Kyle called me out of nowhere. My phone showed his name, and I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hey," he said, his voice uncertain. "I know we haven't really talked in years, but I wanted to say something." I waited in silence, giving him nothing. He continued, "I was wrong. About everything. The money, the way I treated you, thinking I was smarter than you. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I know it's too late to fix anything. I just wanted you to know." I sat with his words for a long moment. Part of me wanted to accept the apology, to let go of years of resentment and anger. But another part of me remembered that this same voice had called me clueless, had laughed when I discovered the theft, had shown no remorse until he lost everything. "I appreciate you saying that," I finally responded, my voice careful and measured. "But apologies don't undo damage. They don't restore trust. They're just words. Your actions showed me who you really are. I believe those actions more than I believe this apology." He was quiet. Then, "Fair enough. I deserve that. I just thought you should know I understand now what I did to you. Losing everything taught me things I wish I'd known before." We talked for a few more minutes, awkwardly, like strangers who once knew each other well. When we hung up, I felt oddly empty. The apology I might have wanted years ago meant almost nothing now. The anger had burned itself out, replaced by indifference. Kyle had become someone I used to know, someone who hurt me once, someone I no longer had strong feelings about one way or another. Sophie asked about the call that evening. "Do you think he really means it?" The apology. I considered her question carefully. "Probably. But it doesn't matter much at this point. He's sorry because he lost. If he'd won, if his theft had worked out well for him, he'd never have apologized. That's not real remorse. It's regret about consequences." Sophie nodded thoughtfully. "So what happens now? Do you forgive him?" I realized I didn't have a clear answer. Forgiveness felt too generous for what Kyle had done, but holding on to active anger felt exhausting and pointless. I existed somewhere in the middle, not forgiving, but also not actively hating anymore. Our parents aged, and with their aging came new family dynamics. When my father got sick with cancer, Kyle and I had to coordinate caregiving and medical decisions. We worked together efficiently, professionally, like business partners handling a difficult project. We split responsibilities and costs fairly. We communicated through email and text rather than in person when possible. We both showed up for Dad, putting aside our broken relationship to be the sons he needed. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was functional cooperation. Sometimes that's the best broken relationships can achieve. Dad died on a Tuesday morning with both of us at his bedside. Kyle held one of his hands and I held the other. And for a moment we were just two grieving sons rather than former brothers estranged by betrayal. At the funeral, Kyle and I stood together receiving condolences, presenting a united front for our mother's sake. People who didn't know our history saw two dutiful sons supporting each other through loss. People who knew the truth saw the careful distance we maintained, the lack of real connection beneath the surface courtesy. Dividing Dad's estate was surprisingly simple. He had left everything clearly outlined in a will that showed he understood his son's relationship better than we thought. Equal shares of modest savings, the family house to be sold and proceeds split, personal items distributed by mutual agreement. Kyle and I handled it through lawyers, maintaining professional distance throughout the process. There was no fighting, no accusations, no drama. Just two men efficiently settling the affairs of their deceased father while maintaining the boundaries that years of betrayal had established. Our mother took Dad's death hard, deteriorating rapidly without him. She moved into an assisted living facility within a year, her memory starting to fade. Kyle and I split the costs and visits, still coordinating efficiently but distantly. Sometimes when I visited Mom, she would get confused and think I was there with Kyle, asking where my brother was, saying how nice it was that her boys were so close. I didn't correct her. Let her remember us the way we used to be, before greed and betrayal destroyed something that once felt unbreakable. On one of these visits, Mom was having a particularly clear day. She looked at me with sudden focus and said, "You boys never worked it out, did you? Whatever happened between you?" I hesitated, not wanting to burden her with truth she couldn't change. But she deserved honesty. "No, Mom. We didn't. Some things can't be worked out. They can only be accepted and moved past." She nodded slowly, tears forming. That's the saddest thing about getting old. Watching your children drift apart and knowing you can't fix it. 10 years after the original theft, I received an unexpected email from Kyle. "I'm writing a book about financial mistakes and their consequences," it said. "I wanted to ask your permission to include our story. Not using real names, but the basic situation. I think it could help people understand how greed destroys relationships." I stared at the email for a long time, feeling complicated emotions I couldn't quite name. He wanted to profit from our story, from my pain, from his theft. But he was also acknowledging it publicly, owning his mistakes in a way he never had before. I wrote back, "You can write whatever you want about your own experience and mistakes, but don't involve me in it. Don't use anything about my response or the rental house or any of it. Tell your side of the story if you need to, but leave me out of it completely." He replied with a simple thank you and agreement. The book came out a year later, a self-published memoir about financial betrayals and redemption. I never read it. I didn't need to relive those years through Kyle's perspective. I had moved on in all the ways that mattered. My real estate portfolio had grown to 12 properties by this point, generating significant passive income. Sophie managed the business side, while I focused on property acquisition and management decisions. We were financially comfortable in ways I had never imagined possible when Kyle first stole my money. The irony wasn't lost on me. His theft had forced me to become smarter about money, more careful about investments, more strategic about building wealth. In a twisted way, his betrayal had made me significantly more successful than I might have been otherwise. Emma and James Jr. were teenagers now, smart and independent and refreshingly honest. I had taught them about the importance of integrity, about how trust once broken is almost impossible to rebuild, about how money reveals character. I told them age-appropriate versions of what happened with their uncle, wanting them to learn from it without being traumatized. Family doesn't mean blind trust, I explained. It means hoping for the best, but protecting yourself when people show you who they really are. The final chapter in the Kyle story came on a random Thursday afternoon. I was reviewing property reports when my phone rang with his number. We hadn't spoken directly in over a year. "Hey," he said, sounding older and tired. I wanted to let you know I'm moving across the country. New job in Seattle. Fresh start. I thought you should hear it from me rather than Mom. I processed this information, feeling surprised by how little emotion it generated. That's good, Kyle. I hope it works out for you. He paused, then said something unexpected. You won. You know that, right? You completely won. The rental house, the success, the family respect, everything. You won and I lost, and we both know it. I thought about his words carefully before responding. It was never about winning, Kyle. It was about justice. About consequences. About refusing to be a victim. If that looks like winning to you, fine. But from my perspective, we both lost the day you stole from me. We lost a relationship that could have been something good. That's not winning. That's just surviving. We said awkward goodbyes and hung up. I sat quietly for a long time afterward, thinking about two brothers who had started life sharing a bedroom and dreams, who had ended up as distant strangers connected only by DNA and shared history. The sadness I felt was distant now, muted by years and perspective. Kyle moving to Seattle was probably good for both of us. Distance would make family gatherings less tense, remove the constant reminder of everything that had broken between us. Sophie found me sitting in my office, staring at nothing. Kyle, she asked, somehow knowing. I nodded. Moving to Seattle. Says I won. She sat down beside me, taking my hand. Did you? I thought about everything. The theft, the revenge, the rental property, the years of cold distance, the apologizes that came too late, the separate lives we had built. I got justice, I said slowly. I protected myself. I built something good despite what he did. But winning? No. Nobody wins when family destroys itself over money. That night, I drove past the old house where Kyle used to pay me rent, where he lived with daily reminders of his failure and my response. The new tenants had decorated for the holidays, lights twinkling warmly in the windows. It looked happy, lived in, loved. It had stopped being about revenge years ago and become just another investment property, just another source of income. Maybe that was its own kind of healing, transforming something born from pain into something ordinary and useful. I thought about writing a letter to Kyle before he moved, something to provide closure or forgiveness or wisdom. But what would I say? The truth was simple and unchangeable. He had betrayed me, I had responded, consequences had followed, and we both lived with the aftermath. Words couldn't add anything meaningful to that basic reality. Some stories don't have neat endings with reconciliation and restored relationships. Some stories just end with two people moving in different directions, carrying scars and lessons and separate lives. When I got home, Emma asked me about her Uncle Kyle over dinner. Why don't we see him much? Did you guys have a fight? I chose my words carefully, wanting to be honest without being bitter. Your uncle made some choices that broke trust between us. We tried to work it out, but some damage can't be fully repaired. So now we're polite but distant. It's sad, but it's reality. That's why I always tell you, guard your integrity, choose your actions carefully, because some mistakes have permanent consequences. Years later, I look back on the whole experience with something approaching wisdom. Kyle stole nearly $1 million from me, and I responded by systematically taking control of something he wanted desperately. The money never came back. Our relationship never healed. But I learned lessons worth far more than $1 million. Trust is precious and rare. Family can betray you as easily as strangers. Protecting yourself isn't cruel when someone has proven they'll hurt you, and justice is about balance rather than revenge. The rental property I bought specifically to dominate Kyle eventually sold for 3 times what I paid for it. I used the profits to fund Emma's college education, ensuring she would never start adult life burdened by debt the way I had been. That felt like a better ending to the story than anything involving Kyle directly. Taking his betrayal and transforming it into security for the next generation, turning pain into protection, converting theft into investment and growth. If I could go back and prevent the original theft, would I? The answer surprises me. I'm not sure. Yes, I'd keep the money. Yes, I'd avoid the pain and anger and years of strained family relationships. But I'd also lose the lessons that made me who I am now, careful, strategic, self-reliant, impossible to manipulate. The version of me who trusted blindly was weaker than the version who survived betrayal and came out stronger. Sometimes our worst experiences create our best qualities. Kyle sent a Christmas card from Seattle that first year, a generic family photo with him, Beth, and their kids. On the back, he had written simply, Thank you for teaching me about consequences. I hope you're well. I put the card in a drawer rather than displaying it with others, acknowledging the gesture without embracing it. Maybe someday we'd rebuild something resembling a relationship. But that day wasn't today, might never come, and I had made peace with that reality. The man who once called me clueless learned an expensive lesson about underestimating people. The brother who stole from me learned that actions have consequences that last longer than he imagined. And I learned that revenge is less satisfying than movies suggest, that justice is quieter than you'd expect, and that surviving betrayal with your integrity intact is its own kind of victory. Not the victory Kyle thought I won, but something deeper and more valuable. The knowledge that I could be tested by someone I loved and still choose to be the person I wanted to be. That's the real inheritance from this entire experience. Not the property or the money or the satisfaction of watching Kyle struggle. The inheritance is understanding myself, knowing my limits, recognizing manipulation when I see it, and being willing to protect myself even when it costs relationships I once treasured. Those lessons shaped every decision I've made since, every relationship I've entered, every trust I've extended or withheld. Kyle stole my money, but inadvertently he gave me something more valuable. The gift of clear-eyed self-knowledge and the strength that comes from surviving betrayal without becoming bitter. And in the end, karma didn't need my help. It found Kyle on its own, in ways big and small, through natural consequences that followed his choices. My role wasn't to punish him. It was simply to refuse to be punished myself, to take back control, to build something good from the ruins of broken trust. That's not revenge. That's just life, moving forward despite the wounds we carry, building despite the betrayals we survive, becoming stronger in the broken places. The house Kyle wanted sits rented now to a family that appreciates it, generating income that funds my children's future. My brother lives across the country, building a new life far from his mistakes. And I'm here, content with the justice I achieved, satisfied with the life I built, at peace with the brother I lost but the person I became. Sometimes, that's the best ending any painful story can offer. Not reconciliation, but acceptance. Not forgiveness, but peace. Not winning, but surviving well.